You were just a name on a roster to them. A body to fill a slot. A girl with a quiet past they never cared to know. That's what they thought when they handed you the M82 Barrett. Just another rifle to hold. But they didn't know who you were. And in that moment, the world was about to learn something they would never forget. If you believe that no one should ever be underestimated, like and subscribe, because this one's for the silent ones. It was supposed to be a routine exercise, a simple check in the box for training. Sierra Martinez, quiet, unassuming, just 28, wasn't the first choice for the team. In fact, she wasn't really on anyone's radar. They had no idea why she was even there. Maybe she was a last-minute addition, an afterthought to fill an empty spot. Lieutenant Cole Walker, the lead spotter, was sure she'd be a waste of time. He'd been doing this for years, hitting targets from miles away, always the loudest voice in the room, always surrounded by veterans who knew how to handle themselves. So, when they handed Sierra the M82 Barrett, he barely spared her a second glance. It wasn't like she had any real experience with something like that. She was just there to hold the rifle, right? The team, seasoned, cocky, and completely dismissive, was more focused on getting through the day than on paying attention to her. Bet she doesn't even know which end of the barrel the bullet comes out of. One of the soldiers muttered as they walked past her, their laughter fading as they took their positions. Walker didn't join in, but he didn't need to. He was too busy setting up for the real snipers. But Sierra didn't seem to care. Her eyes were fixed on the target in the distance. It wasn't a hard shot, not for anyone who knew what they were doing. It was just a part of the drill, a warm-up. And everyone was sure this was where Sierra would flounder. The wind was picking up, the pressure mounting, but she just stood there, steady, taking it all in like she had done 1,000 times before. It was almost too calm. Walker, who had made a habit of loudly pointing out the mistakes of anyone within earshot, was now adjusting the scope of the rifle, grumbling about the weather, the team's lack of preparation, and everything in between. "You sure you're ready for this?" he called out, his voice loud enough for the whole team to hear, though his eyes were never on her, never acknowledging the calm that settled over Sierra's face as she lined up the shot. She didn't say anything, just shifted the rifle slightly, adjusting for the wind's subtle direction. There was no hesitation, no nervous flicker in her eyes, just pure focus. The team didn't understand it. Walker certainly didn't. She was just another rookie, they thought. Just another warm body with a uniform. Make the shot, then, Walker barked, clearly thinking it would be a mess. It wasn't much of a challenge, and he expected her to fail, but still, the words were enough to get everyone's attention. The team was half watching, half laughing, already assuming they'd be witnessing something embarrassing. After all, how could a woman, quiet, with no visible ego or show of force, handle something like an M82? The rifle shook slightly in Sierra's hands as she adjusted her grip, but not from nerves. She was steady, unfazed, and just like that, the sound of the shot ripped through the air, breaking the uneasy silence. The impact was immediate, a direct hit to the target, far beyond anyone's expectations. For a split second, the entire training field went still. Walker froze, his fingers still clutching the scope, his mouth slightly ajar. The rest of the team, standing nearby, exchanged confused glances. They hadn't been expecting this. They hadn't even considered it. A perfect shot. From her. Without breaking a sweat. There were no words, just stunned silence. Walker didn't know what to say. He wanted to laugh it off, wanted to believe it was a fluke, but the reality was undeniable. There was no fluke when the bullet hit exactly where it needed to. It wasn't just luck. It was precision. It was skill. You actually hit it?" Walker stammered, his usual bravado faltering for the first time since they started. His gaze shifted between the rifle and Sierra's unflinching face. This wasn't what he expected. No, this wasn't even close to what he expected. Sierra didn't acknowledge his shock. She didn't smile. She didn't do anything except line up the next shot. Her focus was never broken, her hands steady as they shifted the rifle into position once more. "Another shot, sir?" she asked quietly, almost as if she were speaking to herself, but loud enough for the team to hear. Her voice wasn't demanding. It didn't need to be. She didn't need to prove anything. Not to them. Not to anyone. But Walker, still processing what had just happened, was slowly coming to terms with the realization that maybe he had underestimated her. The rest of the team, who had watched from the sidelines, were now looking at her differently. The whispers started to fade, The laughter cut short. What had they just witnessed? A woman, one they thought was a beginner, just hit a target that seasoned professionals struggled with. They didn't know how to respond, and the silence that filled the air after her shot lingered long after the echo faded. Walker finally adjusted the scope, his voice barely audible, now tinged with a hint of hesitation. Let's see if you can do it again." He wasn't mocking anymore. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but he knew one thing. Sierra Martinez had done something he hadn't expected, and now, he wasn't just a little curious. He was invested. Sierra nodded once, unbothered. "I'll do it again," she replied, steady as ever, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And she would. Not for them, not for him, but because it was what she had always done. Show up, stay steady, and deliver when it counted. The team might have thought they were in control, but Sierra was the one who was quietly changing everything. The next shot wasn't going to be as easy. Sierra knew it. Walker knew it. But the rest of the team had no idea just how hard it would be. After the perfect hit on the first target, the whispers behind her back started to shift. They weren't laughing anymore, but they still weren't convinced. They figured it had to be luck. After all, how could a rookie, a woman with barely any presence, pull off something like that? Walker, still incredulous, gave a dry laugh as he adjusted the new target. "All right, Martinez, let's see what you're really made of. This one's a bit trickier, even for the best," he said, though the doubt was still thick in his voice. He motioned toward a target that sat almost 3,000 meters away, perched on a small cliff edge, nearly impossible to hit with any reliability, let alone a rookie with little experience. The wind was picking up now, shifting unpredictably, and the ground below them wasn't exactly conducive to precision shooting. Sierra hadn't asked for this challenge, but she wasn't going to back down from it either. She knew it wouldn't be as simple as the first. The weight of the rifle alone, the wind, the distance, it would test every bit of her training. But somehow, the pressure didn't feel like pressure. It felt like everything was just falling into place, like it was supposed to happen this way. She was aware of the eyes on her, some curious, others judgmental, and Walker's eyes, which had now turned into a mixture of doubt and intrigue. He was already recalculating his assumptions, though he didn't admit it to anyone. The team gathered behind her, barely holding back their whispers. They didn't think she could do it. And truthfully, Sierra didn't care if they thought that or not. She wasn't here for them. She wasn't here for validation. She focused on the target in the distance, narrowing her vision, letting the world around her fall away. The wind? It was just background noise. The pressure? It was a companion, always present, always sharp, but not enough to disturb her. She had been through tougher situations than this, situations where failure meant more than just missing a target. She'd been in combat. She'd been through the worst of it. And none of it, none of the fear, none of the uncertainty, was here with her now. "You sure about this, Martinez?" Walker's voice broke through the stillness, laced with challenge. His tone was more a test than a question. He wanted her to fail, not out of malice, but out of a need to prove that her first shot had been a fluke. She didn't answer him right away. Instead, she adjusted the rifle slightly, careful but confident in her movements. She could hear the faint hum of the wind, feel its direction on her cheek as she adjusted the settings on the rifle's scope. The shot would be harder. It would require more than luck, more than simple skill. It would require precision, the kind that came from years of learning how to block everything else out, and simply trust in the motion of the rifle, the guidance of the crosshairs, and the knowledge that her body knew exactly what to do. The moment she exhaled, she let her body fall into its rhythm. It was like a dance. Every move deliberate, every calculation made, even before she pulled the trigger. And when the wind shifted once more, it wasn't an obstacle. It was just another variable she had learned to account for. Her finger gently brushed the trigger. The shot rang out. Everyone went silent. This wasn't just a shot. This was a message. Sierra didn't look at anyone. She didn't wait for their reactions. She just pulled the bolt back, loaded another round, and set her sights again. She was already prepared for the next test, the one they didn't see coming. Walker finally turned to the team, his voice hoarse. Did she hit it?" he asked, not quite believing it himself. The spotter next to him, one of the seasoned veterans, nodded slowly, though his face was still locked in disbelief. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "She nailed it. Right in the center." Walker's face turned an interesting shade of red, somewhere between disbelief and anger. "No way," he muttered. "That's impossible." But it wasn't impossible. It was just that Sierra was better than they had given her credit for. And they were beginning to realize it. Walker stepped toward her slowly, his gait more cautious now than cocky. He was still reeling from the shock, but the reality of what had just happened was settling in. "All right, Martinez. Looks like I owe you an apology. I didn't think you had it in you, but you just showed me otherwise." Sierra didn't respond to his apology. She didn't need to. There was no smug smile, no boastful reply. Instead, she simply nodded once, as though the acknowledgement was enough. Her calmness, her quiet focus, was what unsettled him the most. The power she had wasn't loud, wasn't in your face. It was silent, and that silence was the deadliest weapon of all. The rest of the team, who had stood in disbelief, now found themselves studying her in a new light. There was no arrogance in her actions, no need to prove anything. It was as though she had always known this moment would come. It was just another day for Sierra Martinez. Just another test she passed without breaking a sweat. Walker's voice was softer when he spoke again, though his pride still stung. "You didn't just hit the target," he said, the hint of respect finally creeping in. "You showed us what it means to be a true marksman." His tone was a far cry from the cocky, condescending attitude he'd had earlier. But in Sierra's eyes, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the shot, and she had delivered. The team wasn't laughing anymore. There was no mockery, no whispered doubts. Only the quiet hum of admiration and the growing realization that they had misjudged her. All of them. And Sierra? She just kept her eyes fixed on the distance, her next shot already in the making. Because for her, this wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about being exactly who she was meant to be. And she wasn't done yet. The challenge had been set. There was no turning back now. The team was on edge, not just because of the shot Sierra had already made, but because they had no idea what was coming next. It wasn't just the distance, or the weather, or the challenge itself. It was the one thing they couldn't predict, her. Sierra wasn't interested in proving anything to them anymore. She had shown them what they doubted. She had proved she could hit a target from over 3,000 meters with an M82 Barrett. That wasn't the end of it, though. That was just the beginning. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows over the training field, Walker spoke again, his voice now taking on a more serious, even hesitant tone. "All right, Martinez, you've hit the easy stuff. Now, let's see how you handle a real test." The rest of the team gathered around, though none of them dared speak up. They weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, waiting, and maybe even a little afraid of what Sierra might do next. The rifle sat there, its cold steel gleaming in the fading light, a reminder of the immense power it held. And now, it would be hers to command again. Walker set up the next target, a moving one, hidden behind trees and rocks, just out of sight, requiring a pinpoint calculation of the shot's timing and placement. It wasn't just about distance anymore. It wasn't about hitting something stationary and predictable. This was real. This was the test to see if Sierra could go beyond just hitting the target and become something more than just a sniper, someone capable of executing the impossible. The wind had shifted again, making things even harder. The atmosphere on the field was tense, thick with anticipation. Walker, now completely focused, motioned for Sierra to take the position. He wasn't confident anymore. His usual bravado had faded. He was no longer in control. This wasn't just about military tactics anymore. This was a fight for respect, for understanding what true precision could be. He started to walk her through the setup. The target was moving. It would appear in a gap between the trees, just for a split second, before disappearing again. There would be no second chances. This was the kind of shot that could either make or break a sniper's career. Walker had done it himself once, years ago, but he'd seen men crumble under pressure in moments like these. "All right, Martinez," he said, his voice sharp but quieter than usual. "Take the shot when you see it. You've got one chance. You don't want to miss. Understand?" She nodded, never breaking her focus from the distant area where the target would appear. She didn't answer verbally. She didn't need to. Walker waited for the telltale sign that the target would cross the gap, just as it had been designed. The wind picked up again, howling through the trees, as if nature itself was testing her. The team had gathered behind her, all eyes trained on the rifle, their nerves hanging on every breath she took. For the first time, they were all holding their breath, waiting for the shot. And then, just like that, the target appeared. a fleeting moment between the trees. In that split second, Sierra's hands moved like clockwork. Her body didn't hesitate. The crosshairs lined up perfectly, and she squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The shot had been so clean, so fast, that no one was sure it had even landed. Walker's heart stopped for a moment. His gaze shifted toward the trees, his eyes searching for the target. The sound of the rifle still echoed in the air, but there was a strange stillness hanging over the group. Sierra lowered the rifle slowly, her gaze fixed on the distance. No rush, no moment of triumph, just the quiet assurance that she had done it. It had been done, and now, she was waiting for them to catch up. Walker walked over slowly, his steps unsure. He was no longer sure if he wanted to believe it, but the weight of what he had just witnessed made his stomach churn. Did you hit it?" he asked, though the question was almost too absurd to ask. His voice barely sounded like his own. "Go check," Sierra said quietly, the calmness in her voice unnerving him. Without a word, Walker turned and sprinted toward the area where the target had been. The team followed, a line of soldiers unsure whether they were about to witness the impossible. Walker reached the spot, his eyes scanning the trees. And then he saw it. The target, perfectly destroyed. Not a scratch on the perimeter, not a fragment of the target left standing. It was gone, obliterated by the sheer force of the bullet's impact. Walker turned back slowly, his face pale. You actually hit it," he whispered, disbelief lingering in his tone. He had been certain she wouldn't. But now, the reality of it was settling over him. Sierra stood up, not a trace of smugness in her expression. No arrogance. She didn't need to flaunt it. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. The team now stood in complete silence, their eyes wide, some unable to look away from the rifle, some staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Martinez," Walker started, his voice finally steady, though still tinged with awe. I didn't think you had it in you. I didn't think you could do that." Sierra didn't answer. She didn't need to. The words had already been said. Her rifle had done all the talking for her. As Walker stood there, struggling to come to terms with what had just happened, one of the team members, an experienced sniper who had been watching from the sidelines, walked up to Sierra. His voice was low but firm, no longer mocking, no longer dismissive. "You're one of us now," he said simply, extending his hand. Sierra looked at him for a moment, then nodded. She shook his hand once, firmly, silently acknowledging the unspoken respect that had just been earned. She didn't need a speech, didn't need to say anything more. The quiet power of her actions had already changed everything. Walker, still processing the turn of events, turned away, his mind racing. He had seen hundreds of snipers come and go, each with their own stories, their own egos, their own bravado. But never, not once, had he seen someone like Sierra Martinez, someone who carried so much power in their silence, someone who never had to scream to make a point. And now, as the wind began to die down, the team stood together in that fleeting moment of realization. Sierra had proved them wrong. But more than that, she had proven something else, something they hadn't even realized they were looking for. True strength doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It just does its job, and when the moment comes, it leaves the world in silence, stunned and speechless. Sierra walked away from the training field, her rifle slung over her shoulder. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to prove. But the world had just learned her name. And that was enough.